Now, video games. They're bigger than Hollywood these days. They're played by almost as many women as men. So why is it there's so much misogyny and vitriol poured out online when women complain about how they're portrayed in the games they play, much less want to develop? The biggest controversy to hit the gaming world was last year. It was called Gamergate. It was a series of sexist attacks on women working in the gaming industry itself. When the story broke, about 6 months ago now, it was everywhere online, but the debate around women in games seems to have died down at least. But then something else happened last week when a couple of episodes shone the spotlight back on the issues around women in gaming. To talk about this is Dan Golding. He's with me now. He's a video games critic and academic. He's the director of the Freeplay Independent Games Festival, and Dan also happens to be the presenter of RN's recent series, A Short History of Video Games. And Dan, can you just give us a potted history itself today of Gamergate? How does this all begin?
Well, I have to start with a slight sidetrack, because you mentioned animals and insects at the start of the program, and a Gamergate is a kind of ant. Completely disconnected from what we're talking about, but before it was known as a controversy in video games, a Gamergate was a form of ant, so I just had to throw in there to make that link. I love the fact
that you know that. That's so great. Thank you.
So what Gamergate is as you said, is essentially a series of sexist attacks on women in games. And now, I think perhaps what would come to mind to your listeners when we talk about games and the culture of games is that it's a very masculine-driven sort of thing, you know, lots of men playing games. That's the popular image.
That's the stereotype, yeah.
Right, right. And that's never really been true throughout the entire history of video games.
And it's increasingly becoming more untrue.
Right, right, exactly. And so I think that you know, a certain section of the games culture, of the games industry, felt that it was true, at least in part, and sort of started to own that, started to feel like perhaps it was a safe space for men to be men, boys to be boys, right?
Yeah.
Even though that was never really the case.
It's the digital sweat lodge.
Right. Yes. Yes. The treehouse.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. With no ladder for the girls.
No. Exactly. However, so what's happened, I think, is that over the last 5 years, but certainly over the last 2 or 3, we've had increasingly visible pushback to that by the women who are working in the industry. But
and this all began with a breakup that should have been personal and nothing else, of a relationship between a games developer and a journalist.
Right, yes, absolutely. So this is the flashpoint. This is what creates the thing that we now know as Gamergate. I suppose there's all that context that builds up to it.
That's the foundation for the hate.
Right, and a lot of people say that really Gamergate is just the name for the thing that's been happening, you know, to them for a long time, and I think that's probably true. But
so this incident just lit the fuse, essentially.
Right, exactly, yeah. Where it was, you know, essentially a private relationship, but, you know, it sort of spilled out, and the developer in question, a woman, was already the target of a lot of attacks, because she made a game that was sort of about feelings, right? Not about killing people, not about, you know...
you can say the name of the game.
The name of the game is Depression Quest. And it's exactly that. It's a semi-autobiographical about her experiences with depression, and just about the player dealing with depression. It's text-based. It doesn't feature, you know, amazing photorealistic graphics, but it's a game. And so this is, you know, something that a lot of people who traditionally understood video games to be a certain thing got really unreasonably irritated by, because she was a woman, because she was making a game that was not about a traditional subject that they were maybe comfortable with.
So it got mixed reviews?
Well, no, it got good reviews. But
the problem is, one of those good reviews was
no, so this doesn't exist. This is part of the controversy, is that supposedly, you know, someone that she had a relationship with wrote a review of the game. That never happened. But this is a myth that is perpetuated by these people who want to hang something on this controversy, want to substantiate it. It's just not there, basically.
And this developer, Paula Quinn?
Zoe Quinn.
Zoe Quinn, my apologies. Zoe then was the subject of utterly abhorrent attacks online.
Yeah, absolutely terrible stuff that just isn't going away as well. And, you know, so she's had her personal details released online, I think, on multiple occasions. You know, she's had photos of herself circulated.
Threats of violence?
Absolutely, yep. And you know, worse, rape threats as well. And these are all things that are, you know, substantiated. She's taken them to the police, etc. The FBI is investigating.
All because she happens to be, in some people's eyes, the wrong gender to develop a game.
Yep.
That's the basis for these attacks.
Basically. Look, I mean, they would say that there's all sorts of corruption and all sorts of, people working at cross purposes and with vested interests. But, none of that has been substantiated. And I think it's really clear, especially by now, that this is just a smokescreen for people to launch these attacks because of these other things, because she's making a game that people don't feel like fits into their idea of video games, and because she's a woman.
Well, let's talk to someone who's also involved in dealing with this issue day to day, and I think she's wishing she wasn't. And her name is Leena van Deventer, and she's a Melbourne-based game developer and co-director of Widget. It's a not-for-profit organisation aimed at helping women game developers and women in IT generally. And Leena, hello, welcome to RN Afternoons.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
I guess you wish we weren't even having this conversation.
I do. I really, really do. Every day.
How current is what Dan's been describing in your life now?
There's always been that unwelcoming, ominous kind of presence, but I knew there were, a group of people who didn't like me being around. And I guess within the last 5 months that's been given a name and become a bit more obvious for a lot of other women. Glaringly obvious because it's what they're living in their day-to-day lives. But I haven't experienced the kind of harassment that they have. But I've been trying to help a lot of women that have been getting a lot of flack from this, and also questioning what they're even doing making games in the first place.
Because you actually are involved in education around video game development, aren't you?
Yes, yeah. I teach in a game design degree, and I'll be teaching in 2 this year. And teaching during Gamergate was really quite interesting experience. It was very good for me to be around all these amazingly enthusiastic students. That was for self-care for me for going through this was really good. But it was also quite hard. We have a really good gender ratio in our degree. And
I was going to ask you, what's the split these days?
I think it's about 46, but don't quote me on that.
46% are women.
Yes.
Which in turn is almost a reflection of the kind of participation in games across the populace too.
Well, exactly, and a lot of people seem to say that universities need to be doing more, and from what I've seen, it's possible for universities to have a really good gender split, and we still have women being scared off by these kinds of organised hate campaigns.
It's quite extraordinary. And so when Gamergate blew up in the US and then went across, everywhere online and on digital platforms, you were, I think, involved in your education and teaching, and you had female students saying what to you?
They'd often say, I don't think I want to make games anymore, to which I just said, me neither. But I'm going to keep making them until I don't want to anymore. And we did have one student at least who did cite Gamergate as a reason to leave their degree and to not pursue a career in game development anymore.
So that woman's left the cause?
Yes.
Well, that's just appalling.
I tried really hard. I felt like we lost one, but, it's not, maybe it's not a forever decision. Maybe it's just not the right time at the moment for her. But
Leena, how do we start in some effective way without encouraging more of the kind of trolling and threats and police action that should be taken over this kind of reaction? How do we tackle those attitudes that are embedded within some elements of the game industry? Because I'm not afraid to say this is just a classic case of dysfunctional boys and men behaving badly.
Absolutely. I have zero idea how to help the men. And I also have not much interest in trying to help them either, I think.
I understand. I mean,
yeah.
If you wouldn't mind telling us, so we understand why you're feeling so strongly about that, what kind of attacks have you had upon you?
I've had rape threats. I've had a lot of hoity people on Twitter, most of my Twitter career, if we have Twitter careers.
And when they threaten you with things like rape, what's their rationale?
I think it's just the shock value. I think they just want to terrify me, and they think that might work to threaten me with that. But
so, because you're teaching game development and you develop your own games, you're a target for being a woman in this industry.
I'm actually quite vocal too. I think that's why they have a bit of a problem with me personally. Is I'm a loud feminist on the internet, And I think when you're a loud feminist on the internet, you get a lot of hate.
Well, particularly when you're a game developer and a feminist, yes.
Yes,
clearly
definitely.
So.
Perfect storm.
So, can I ask, in terms of your own ethics and approach to life values, how are you embedding that in the kind of games you develop?
Oh, that's a good question. I try and make sure that I'm never participating in any racist, ableist, homophobic, anti-feminist kind of content in any of the games that I'm involved in. And it's something that I'll put my foot down about if I'm working with other people and I see it. And I think it oozes out into pretty much everything I make or I'm involved with. Definitely in the classroom. My students definitely know that there's a certain level of behaviour that's expected, and I won't put up with any flack about women, and there'll be no back in the kitchen jokes in my classroom at all.
Really? Oh, because I think they're rife across tertiary education. But well done, Leena. When it comes to the focal point of all this hate, which was Zoe Quinn in the US, is there a sense of camaraderie between female developers like Zoe and yourself? Does that extend across countries?
I definitely think it does. I think game development, and obviously if we're really in love with video games and want to make that our jobs, we're quite internet savvy, quite computer savvy. And we have that global community of game developers there to call from. And I think especially in the last 5 months, if a woman says to another woman, I need help, I don't know many women that would say, I can't help you right now. We'll go, yeah, okay, we'll help.
And there is a support network for Australian developers?
Yes, I'm trying to start it. Widget is what I'm trying to help out with. Myself and Leah Clark both started that organisation to try and help people. We're having our first unconference next month.
Unconference, I like that.
Unconference.
I'd go to an unconference because then I wouldn't unfall asleep.
Exactly. And we have a large group of people who identify as women in our online support group.
Yep.
So we say we're a women-only support group. That includes people in the trans community as well. So we're not trans exclusive. We think if you identify as a woman, then you're putting up with the same amount of stuff that I'm putting up with. So, definitely more. But, I stand with you because you have to put up with the same stuff that I have to put up with.
Well, look, Leena, all the best with that support group, and wouldn't it be great in a couple of years' time if it just disbanded because there was no need for it anymore?
That would be wonderful.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Leena van Deventer, who is a Melbourne-based game developer and co-director of Widget, a not-for-profit organisation aimed at helping women game developers. We'll put some details up on the RN Afternoons website a little later on today. But back to Dan Golding. Dan, one of the controversial figures in this is a man by the name of Adam Baldwin. Why is he so controversial?
Well, he actually gave Gamergate its name. He's, by most accounts, the first person who used that term to describe what was going on, and that was in support of Gamergate and the outrage over, supposed conflict of interest, etc., etc. And he's sort of been one of their most vocal supporters.
And he's an American actor coming to Australia, isn't he?
That's right, yes. So he's an actor, and, if you've seen TV programs like Firefly and movies like Serenity, he's in Full Metal Jacket as well, the Kubrick film. So he's coming to Australia for a pop culture expo called Supernova. And he's been invited, and there's been quite a lot of, sort of kickback against that, sort of saying, do we really want someone who's, sort of expressed quite unsavoury views, in my opinion at least, on this issue? Do we want someone like that to come to Australia and attract people who perhaps support those views to an event like Supernova, which is pop culture?
So when's he due to arrive?
I think it's a couple of months.
Yeah.
Away, yeah.
So there's a petition online against his arrival?
There is, yeah,
right.
There is, yeah, and I think that petition is still gathering steam as well.
Well, Dan, we're going to have you back on the show for a range of video game themes and concepts in times to come, including one about refugees, which I think is fascinating, and a game that's been developed along those lines.